Hello, everybody. My name is Jeana Dunlap, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors for the Metropolitan Housing Coalition. And we are so glad to have you tuning in and spending the next hour or so with us learning about rental assistance programs that are available here in Louisville. And we hope by the time that you leave this webinar that you'll have a better understanding of what they are, how they work, how to access them, whether you're a landlord or a tenant. And so I'll take care of a bit of housekeeping before we get into the deeper discussion. And so we do want to make sure that everybody is clearly aware that as of August 1st, meaning in just a few days, that the state of Kentucky will begin reopening the courts. And as such, landlords will have an opportunity to initiate notices of eviction, particularly for non-payment. There are some exceptions to that that we hope to dive into later in the conversation, but understand that the moratorium that's been in place in large part will be lifted as of August 1st. So we are doing our best to provide you with the best available information as of this time. And as you've seen in the last several months, information changes daily and on a regular basis. That's why, keeping up with the Metropolitan Housing Coalition for updates on our website will be really critical and a great resource for you and others who are hoping to stay on top of newly available information. We also want to put a plug in for a brand new website that's launching, and it is, if I get my left and right, stopmyeviction.org. That's www.stopmyevictions.org. They also have a Facebook page that you can like, follow, and share. And we'll talk more about that resource and how it really brings together all of the details that somebody needs to be an active participant in making, housing stable and secure for everybody in our community. We want to emphasize today that our audience is targeted to landlords as well as tenants. It requires cooperation between both parties, people on both sides of the coin, to maintain communication, to collaborate, to be transparent with one another so that everybody can experience the best outcomes. Landlords, at the end of the day, need and want people in their spaces. And people want to stay in those spaces, especially if they've grown accustomed to where they are. So we're hoping that today's conversation will illuminate ways to make that happen for the greater good for everybody. And I'll also let you know that we are recording this event. We're currently on Zoom as well as Facebook Live. But if you go to our Facebook Live page at any time following this, you'll be able to review or share the entire webinar with anybody that you'd like to. So just keep that in mind. Also the MHC YouTube channel as well. So lots of different ways for you to stay connected, to, like I say, revisit the information or share it with those who couldn't be here with us today. So before we get started, I have a few acknowledgements. One, we'd like to acknowledge Marva Johnson. She'll be serving as our American Sign Language interpreter today. If you hover over her window and hit those three little dots in the top square, you can pin her to the window so that no matter who's speaking, you can always have your eyes on Marva and not miss a beat in terms of the conversation and what's being shared. So thank you, Marva, for joining us here today. Moderating our chats, we have Kathy Hinko, the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Housing Coalition, as well as Jess Brown, who currently serves as the Planning Director at the Center for Neighborhoods, which specializes in resident leadership training, neighborhood engagement, and community planning. So thank you, Kathy and Jess. And then finally, we have Tony Curtis, Metropolitan Housing Coalition's Development Director, who is literally piloting this entire webinar. So thank you for everything you do now beyond, Tony, to get the message out. And so with that, I want to give a brief introduction of all of our panelists here today. and then start to get into some of the details, soup to nuts on what's currently happening in Louisville with rental assistance. So first we have Robin Bray. Robin serves as the vice chair of the Metropolitan Housing Coalition's board of directors. She is a real estate investor, a realtor, as well as a landlord specializing in providing housing for low-income families. So thank you for being with us here today, Robin. Next, we have Cassandra Miller. Cassandra serves as the Social Service Policy and Advocacy Manager at Louisville Metro Government in the Department of Resilience and Community Services. She also manages the administrative and social services with the nationally recognized neighborhood place locations. So thank you, Cassandra, for all that you do. Next, we have Marilyn Harris. Marilyn is the director of the Office of Housing at Louisville Metro Government. And the Office of Housing is currently administering the landlord tenant rental assistance programs for affordable rental properties that have received some form of federal, state, or local dollars and are restricted to low-income tenants. And so we're definitely going to want to unpack some of the details about what Marilyn is overseeing. And last, but certainly not least, we've got Claire Wallace. Claire is the director of South Louisville Community Ministries and the vice president of the Association of Community Ministries, which is a network of 13 organizations that cover the entire Jefferson County. And she also recently launched the Louisville Rapid Access Network, or RAN as it's often called, and launched the website that you see highlighted behind each and most of us, stopmyeviction.org. So with that, I want to turn our attention to Robin. Because Robin, I think you play an important role and you represent an important group of stakeholders in our community, and that is that of landlords. So landlords are both big and small mom and pop operations. It runs the gamut. But, tell us or share from your perspective, why does it make sense for a landlord to work with their tenant to keep them in the home?
Well, in working with your tenant, the landlord can supply a housing need at this critical point of the COVID-19 virus. I jumped in, and I think that at this point in time we need to think of the humanity of ourselves over profit. I think there's a great opportunity with this new program that will help landlords to get at least 3 months of back rent that can help the tenants to navigate through this process until they can receive unemployment checks, or until they find employment, or until we get a remedy for the COVID-19 virus.
Mm-hmm. I know that you have, a very close, working relationship with the people that you provide housing for. And I'm wondering, certainly I imagine some of them have experienced some challenges directly as a result of the pandemic. But as a landlord, have you had any challenges in terms of tracking down information for both you and your tenants? Can you maybe share what that experience has been like?
Well, I have been around housing for a while, so I've had several emails, and also I've seen several things posted on social media. So I was aware of the program in which we're going to be speaking about. And the only difficulty and challenge I guess I had was, challenge of understanding why, as a landlord, one has to be a landlord of affordable housing development to apply for their tenants to get assistance. I didn't understand that part. And I would guess that with that being a piece in the program, there is probably hundreds of tenants that will be excluded because the landlords can't help them because they're not affordable housing development. You have some landlords might own 2 houses or 5, or a LLC that owns 10 but doesn't meet that criteria. So what that would do is it make difficulty for a tenant. Like, for example, I had a tenant which I wanted to help, and she didn't have a computer, so she's using her cell phone to try to upload information, get access to. So if all landlords could help their tenants, I think that that would be, beneficial.
Right. So did you find any, I guess, help or at least clarification by going to stopmyeviction.org? Have you been to the site? And
Yes, I've been to the site. The site is real good to navigate, and what that does, it in the navigation, it takes you to different platforms. But
Mhm.
once you get to those platforms, when you get into the detail of what is required, explanation just needs to be further. But they give you places to call, they give you opportunities to email. So I think it's very helpful.
That's good to know. So, it may not be the information that people want to hear, but at least getting, a clear answer and clarification in the most efficient and streamlined fashion, I think is of value. Um, Next, we want to hear from Cassandra. And Cassandra, how do tenants or families that are looking to access some rental relief, how do families go about, doing that?
Thank you for the question, Jeana, and thank you for the opportunity to have Neighborhood Place here as a panelist. And for those that don't know what Neighborhood Place is, we are a one-stop shop to help families in their quest toward self-sufficiency. There's 7 sites across Jefferson County, and there's multiple agencies under one roof. I mean, we are really there to help families stabilize their situation and to really help with those things that we all need to live, such as food and rent and, health, those sorts of things. So Neighborhood Place, in terms of eviction prevention and where to go, if folks are in need of rental assistance, they can go to any one of the 7 sites. We do have an appointment system in which we're seeing people right now. We are working in a virtual model. We're not open to the public, although we are there to collect paperwork if folks are not able to email or send those to us electronically in some sense. But there's an appointment system. Folks will go out and schedule an appointment to have a phone call come to them. Once they get the phone call, there will be a service provider that will go over really all of the required documentation that is necessary, as well as where to drop that paperwork off. Mm-hmm. And so if I may, I can go over some of the, the documentation that would be necessary for one person to, if they are in threat of eviction, the kind of paperwork that they would need to submit for. Is that okay to do that?
Yes, please do. Because I think oftentimes, things get delayed or sidetracked because people aren't able to bring everything they need, all at the same time. So if you would sort of run through those, the documentation that people need to have ready when they approach Neighborhood House.
So certainly, Neighborhood Place, Jeana.
I'm sorry.
Neighborhood Place. It's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
We get mixed up all the time. No worries. So this is a program in which households do have to meet a certain income guideline. And so that I don't bore you with all that, I'll just give you kind of a typical household, a household of 4. The income does have to be at or below $61,000 a year, or about $5,000 or below a month. So folks do have to, at a minimum, meet that income requirement, and also have a loss of income that, they have to have a loss of income that directly relates back to COVID. So COVID has to be a reason that, for whatever reason, their household lost income. So this is only for Jefferson County residents. We do have to have a past due notice from a landlord. We do have to have something that demonstrates a landlord-tenant relationship. The payment does have to be necessary to stop the eviction. We can go back 3 months. And the 3 months does include 2 months of past due plus the current month's owed. The household does have to demonstrate that they are able to, after our assistance ends, that they are able to make that payment, the payments moving forward, so that eviction just does not, it doesn't come up again. So I'll just go over those things again really fast. They do have to have a past due notice or an eviction notice from the landlord. And the 30-day notice or 7-day past due notice would suffice for that. They do have to demonstrate what their income level is. They have to verify that their loss of income coming into the household is related directly to COVID, a lease agreement, and then all of your other, necessary documentation such as a picture ID, social security cards, things of that nature. And again, there is an appointment line, and people can either call on the phone if they don't have access to the internet, or they can go onto the website and make their appointment there. Both of those, they will certainly go through all of the necessary information that they would need to have in order to qualify for eligibility. For households where there are people who perhaps do not have a social security card or a number, we do have other, processes in place to handle things like that. So even for folks who are international and perhaps they don't have a social security number, we do take I-10s, or, we have some other things in process that we can even help those households that don't have that. So we just don't want that to prevent anybody from, approaching assistance.
And
so money is available. I'm sorry.
What is an I-10?
An I-10 is a number that the federal government gives you. Typically, that's for people who come in through an organization such as Catholic Charities or something like that. It's a refugee type of situation. That it's a different number that the federal government gives you.
And does Neighborhood Place provide language translators for people who may need them?
We absolutely do. And we have for all languages, whether it's Spanish, French, Arabic, Swahili, whatever it is. We do work through a language line in which we're able to accommodate every language that's spoken, at least in Jefferson County.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. And Jeana, I really just want to stress that this assistance is here to help people really get out of an eviction situation. And so this is not a time for people to be too proud to ask for assistance, because money is available. Money is available. Again, we can go up to 3 months of assistance. Again, 2 months of that can be past due plus the current amount owed. So it's a fair amount of money that we can help one with. And right now, our average amount that we've been helping most households with averages somewhere between $2,200 and $2,500. So it's a substantial amount to mitigate, evictions.
Right. Thank you so much for giving
You're
us
welcome.
insights on, tangible aspects, how people
Absolutely.
can show up, what they can potentially give. And I think it's so important to be transparent about those things, because it's already difficult conditions and navigating it can be really tricky. But, maybe we can make sure to put the phone number so people can call in the chat, as well as, encourage people to go to stopmyeviction.org that has consolidated all of this information for every audience to get the information that they need.
And the phone number and the web address is there at stopmyeviction.org.
Okay. I mean, we do understand everybody doesn't have access to the internet, so that's why we want to make sure that we get the phone number in people's hands to make those connections. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Next, we're going to turn our attention to Marilyn Harris. And, we've heard about, the tenant side of the equation. Tell us how landlords, especially, compassionate landlords, can access rental relief in order to retain the families that live at their properties.
Yes, thank you, Jeana. So we have a landlord-based program, and a landlord who has received some form of federal, state, or local assistance to rehabilitate, acquire, renovate that type of property, or that property is eligible to apply. So if you receive funds from or a low-income housing tax credit, if you've received local affordable housing trust fund, the state's affordable housing trust fund, local Louisville CARES, which is different than federal CARES, but local Louisville CARES funds, or some other home, CDBG, some other form of federal assistance.
Could
The
you,
landlord,
could you, so we're trying to stay
sorry,
acronym free.
said that,
I
right.
knew we did. So what does CDBG stand for?
So Community Development Block Grant dollars, and they are a federal source administered through my department. HOME is not an acronym. HOME is the Home Investment Partnerships Program, so it's not technically an acronym, but it is abbreviated. And so the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is AHTF, and we have the Louisville Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but we also have the Kentucky Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So we have all of those dollars in the city somewhere. So if your property as an individual unit or a multi-family unit has received any of those funds, you are eligible to apply through the landlord-based program. And essentially the landlord-based program, I'll just use some simple numbers here. A property has 100 units, 20% are delinquent. The landlord can submit all 20 of those delinquent units for assistance, and we can provide up to 3 months rental assistance. We will not pay for any late fees or fines for being late, but we will pay for up to 3 months worth of rental assistance. So we have—
Marilyn, does that rental assistance go to the family or does it go to the landlord?
So my program and Cassandra's program, both of our programs send that check directly to the landlord on the tenant's behalf. So another part of our program is that prior to applying for the tenant-based, the landlord-based program, you have to notify the tenant that you are applying on their behalf, because we are not going to double dip between Cassandra and I's program. So if your tenant has applied for the rental program through the neighborhood place, then we would not fund them also through the tenant-based application. So that is something that is important to note. So, but we have several applications in the door, and you know, so any landlord that has any of those forms of assistance is eligible to apply. And again, you can find the information at stopmyeviction.org. It's the easiest website to go to, and I believe it's all the way at the bottom. But I would certainly encourage anyone to apply that has the ability to do so.
Yeah, so one point of clarification, you just clarified that landlords that are applying for assistance have to have some form of public investment in their property,
Yes.
and they should be aware of that.
Yes.
Is the reverse true for what Cassandra talked about? So like, because you talked about the potential for double dipping and making everybody aware, but I'm saying, like, for a tenant, do they have to live in a publicly subsidized unit
They do not.
in order to get their landlord paid?
They do not. They
Okay.
can live in just a private, you know, we have got a ton of mom and pop landlords. So maybe they owned a house, they lived in it, and then they moved to another house and they're renting that house. There's no assistance anywhere from the city, state, local. And that tenant is eligible to apply through Cassandra's program at the neighborhood place. And there's no requirement that it be a low income unit. So the important thing that Cassandra mentioned was the income limit. So Cassandra has an 80% of AMI limit for her program, and that's the tenant-based program. The landlord-based program actually is a 60% income. And if you live in a low-income unit, you generally would know that because there's an income verification done annually by your landlord. So if annually your landlord comes to you and says, I need to verify, you know, we need to do a recertification, and that is the term that would be familiar to the tenant. If the landlord says, I'm doing a recertification, or it's time for your recertification, that's the big red flag that you probably live in an affordable housing unit that has some form of federal or state subsidy to it.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So I think we're digging deeper into the nuances of these programs separately and how they work together. Next, I'd like to turn our attention to Claire Wallace. And, you know, community ministries, you know, a lot of people are familiar with what you all do as a network and what you do in the various regions of the city. And I'm wondering, you know, is it possible, or do you see situations where people, be they tenants or landlords, can't meet the requirements that Cassandra and Marilyn just talked about and turn to area ministries for help? Does that happen?
Yeah, hello everybody. So definitely that happens. Typically they'll hit a point where they need a document and it's difficult to get. For example, it could be a signature from an employer. There are other documents that you can give to demonstrate that you've lost income. However, sometimes we'll hear back that it's difficult to get those documentations. Another example is if you are receiving child support and that is no longer available to you, that's not, you can't demonstrate that in a certified way, then sometimes we see those families, etc. So unfortunately, our budget is much smaller and our capacity is a little bit more limited. So the idea that we will typically ask a family or an individual, have you applied for neighborhood place funding? And we do ask those to, because they have more money, we can only give about $1,000 at a cap, and that's dependent on funding too. That is always changing, while the neighborhood place can give up to $2,500 at this time. So again, that's going to be your best bet if you can get through those doors. And then we ask that the money that we have available are for those who can't get through. That can sometimes be your landlord won't give a W-9. Sometimes we can work with the landlord. We have that on file already. Sometimes, again, that income eligibility, that's going to be a little bit higher. So that's also something that we can help with. And then also the community ministries. I mean, we are a little bit more flexible in the sense that if you need to work with us through the process, we might be able to make copies for you, etc. So yes, but it's smaller, it's more limited in the sense of what we can give out the door. However, and can I make a quick plug for the Stop My Eviction and how that might transform?
Oh, I was gonna ask you, yes, yes.
We understand that this process is really stressful. Everybody here on this panel knows that. I mean, it is really upsetting to be behind on rent and not know what's coming next. And so right now, what you see is stopmyeviction.org is just a list of some of the resources. However, we are going to be launching an intake coordination team. So you will have the opportunity to fill out a form that gives us just some basic information when you receive that 7-day notice, if you have a court date for your eviction, so that we can work with you to coordinate all of these resources to answer a lot of the questions that I'm seeing right now. I don't have this, but I have that. Will that work? We're going to communicate with the neighborhood places and other community organizations to try and answer those really complex questions so you're not in this alone. We have a team of 25 individuals, and we're hoping that may help you. And then when you call or when you fill out the form, someone will call you hopefully in 24 to 48 hours, and then you will be in communication with that person throughout the process. So again, we're hoping that by having somebody to help you figure out these nuances and these questions and these complicated requirements, and where are you going to get your ID copied when you don't want to leave your home or go to Kinko's, or you can't afford to go to Kinko's and the library is closed. I mean, we're here to try and help answer those difficult things so that this is more accessible for everybody. So come back to the website, stopmyeviction.org. It might be up tomorrow, but over the weekend or on Monday to fill out that form. And then we'll be in touch hopefully by middle of next week. That intake coordination team doesn't launch until Tuesday, so bear with us, please.
So it's the intake coordination team that's going to be available on stopmyeviction.org. And I'm very curious, how are you staffing up with people that are able to walk people, people through the process? I mean, like, that is wonderful. I know it takes a ton of effort. I mean, are you doing this with staff people? Are you inviting volunteers to help with that process?
We actually have been training all week. So that's the part of why we're preparing for this to be launching on Tuesday and can't do it before, because we understand that there's a lot of information out there. And so there's a lot to learn, and there will be a learning curve because, again, too, this information is changing and shifting.
Complex, yes.
So we'll be, as a team, meeting every week to make sure that all of our information is considered. And then also, if there is a dead end, if we can't figure out what that next step is, we're going to bring it to the table and we're going to talk about how maybe we can solve the problem. So really, I hope that everybody goes to that forum. Again, it's not on the website yet, but it will be very soon. Metro United Way has helped us fund a lot of these, the intake coordinators, but we're also partnering with Spalding University's School of Social Work to help with this as well. So we're really lucky. If there is a volunteer who has social work background and some time, feel free to email me. We'll be happy to train you and add you to the team because we will need all hands on deck.
Wonderful, wonderful. So really trying to open up the door and invite people in that want to help and be helpful and help families and landlords navigate this process. I think it's very important. So I will state again that, did you have something else to add, Claire?
This is really important, actually, because if you do not have computer access, you can call 211 and they will actually fill the form out for you over the phone. So as soon as the form is up, you can also call 211 to make that happen, so that you won't have to use a computer, or if it's really hard to type on your phone, you can call 211.
Thank you. And so I do want to just sort of illuminate a little bit more about this August 1st, sort of threshold, where people will begin to get probably the first of their 30-day notices, right? But there is some more details, similar to what Marilyn talked about or touched on with publicly supported rental. There's more of it than you realize. People get funding from the government beyond just public housing, right? That's one of the beauty of the way that it blends in with housing of all other kinds from all other financing sources. But essentially, if you are in a government supported apartment, we want the tenants to know that your landlord is not necessarily just free and clear to give you a notice. And so, in fact, there's a tool that was recently created by the Root Cause Research Center, which does phenomenal work and puts data in the hands of the people. And if you visit their website, they have an interactive map where you can actually type in your address and it will give you an indication of whether or not there's any type of federal support, state, local support in the apartment that you stay in, so that you can have an awareness that your landlord is really not supposed to be pressuring you if that's happening. So I'm sure that we'll get, we'll be able to share that. Or if you want to Google it, you can Google Root Cause Research Center. I believe it's publicly available on their website, and you can sort of dig down into some of that information. And I guess we're at pretty good time here, which is going to leave us ample time for questions from our audience. But before we do that, are there any nuances that our panelists or points that our panelists would like to raise until we jump into the Q&A?
Jeana, can I just back up and just clarify or add some things in terms of what all may be necessary.
Yes, please do.
So, I mean, we do require some paperwork, documentation, and that is just what our funding source requires of us. But one of the things that we will, or two of the things that we will need from landlords who are interested in being able to help their tenant, one, we need a commitment from them that they will accept our payment. And then the other thing is that we do need a W-9. And that's a tax form that's necessary for us, Louisville Metro government, in order for us to be able to cut the payment to the client. So it's just what we need to set up in our financial system in order for payments to get out. And so, sometimes when
can I clarify something you just
sure.
said? So on the rental side, if there's a tenant that's applying,
yes,
the payment is going directly to their landlord.
Yes.
And are you saying that tenant has to produce their landlord's W-9?
We as the agency would request the W-9 from the landlord to complete.
Okay, on the tenant's behalf.
Yes, on the tenant's behalf. Yes. Okay. Yes, and sometimes that sounds a little bit scary, but it's not. It's a quick form to fill out. It does ask for a little bit of personal information from the landlord, such as a federal ID, and if they don't have that, their social security number will suffice, and we're able to get them set up in our system as a vendor in order for us to cut the check directly to them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But that's something I throw that out there because we have a fair amount of individual landlords already in our system. I mean, we have a ton of them. But if there is a new landlord that has never done business with Louisville Metro government, that would be an ask from them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So just looking over the questions coming from the Facebook, people are needing clarification on how the flow of resources work. And so the way it's framed, it says that this is not just to landlords, right? So I mean, at least in the rental relief programs that both Marilyn and Cassandra have addressed today, the application can come from a tenant or a landlord,
right?
But the payments will always go to the landlord. Is that
correct?
Okay.
Correct.
And there's more flexibility and latitude when a tenant applies, and more restrictions when a landlord applies. Is that fair to say, ladies?
I'm not familiar with any more restrictions.
Well, Marilyn's comment is that you have to be publicly subsidized.
Yes, correct. So yes, that's correct. Yes,
okay. And when you're submitting through us, we're asking for a copy of your LORA or a deed restriction to show that you are. So all those great land use restrictive agreement, and those are issued by Kentucky Housing Corporation when there's low-income housing tax credits. So we're asking for proof that you are one of those subsidized entities. And we are also requiring the landlords to notify the tenants. And then once we issue checks, we are sending the tenants a letter that says, we have issued a check to your landlord in the amount of X number of dollars. Hold on to this letter, because in exchange for receiving the money from us, the landlords have to agree not to evict the tenant for the next 60 days. So we are buying 60 days of residency with that money. And that's critically important because we don't know when we're going to be out of this pandemic.
That's right. I have a question in the stream that is asking about, I guess, proof of COVID impact, right? And particularly, they're saying, what if there's somebody who's been deemed an essential worker, and they don't meet the loss of income due to COVID standard, but they still have a need for financial assistance and may still be facing a potential eviction. Claire, maybe you could sort of, give us some insight on a situation like that. I'm sure you see a really broad spectrum of situations.
We do. So we are, and we can be a little bit more flexible. When we say that you've been affected by COVID-19, we see families sometimes who are relying on family members for that supplemental income to get by, and then all of a sudden that supplemental income is gone. That's hard to prove, but we work with you through that potential circumstance. There is, and this has been an issue across the city before the pandemic hit, is that there's very limited rental assistance available to people. And so we have, it's so small, it's like $100 per family, and that's pretty limited already. And we all know that $100 for when you're behind on, $800 of rent, or maybe 2 months, that gets really costly and it's not as helpful. But the idea too is that no matter what, even if you are not affected by COVID-19, you can fill out that form on stopmyeviction.org, and we will look at all of the potential resources available to you. The second piece is that, there's another rental assistance program that is consistent with the neighborhood place as well, but that is also if you've lost some income as well. Cassandra,
Jeana, I'll add to that too. So for people who have not been impacted by COVID, they should still be in contact with Neighborhood Place, because we do have some other funding that we may be able to help out in situations like that.
Is that the emergency assistance program?
It is. Mm-hmm. It is. And there are some other guidelines that come into play, but having to have a loss of income related to COVID is not one of them.
Can you say what the big qualifier is, Cassandra? Because I know that that's going to be important.
Yeah, so the big qualifier is that you have to be within the income guidelines, which right now is 150% of poverty. So it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more than food stamps, and I don't have like a good example of what a family of 4 is. But I will say that if you qualify for food stamps, you would be within the income guidelines for that program. You do have to have a minimum number of work hours. This is a program. It's not there to supplement like fixed income households. Unfortunately, we don't have the funding for that, but this is a program in which if people are working and they're still not able to, meet their bills, and they've been working a relatively, part-time position, 20 hours or more a week for the past 4 months, there's some eligibility there for those folks.
Great. So there are still, programs that were in place before the pandemic hit that people should know about. And again, like you encouraged and invited people, Cassandra, don't be, reluctant to reach out and ask. The worst thing that people could say is no, but you might be surprised, especially if you've got, good people at Neighborhood Place and people at, stopmyevictions.org that are helping you navigate the system. On the flip side, we've got a question in the chat about people gaming the system, right? So I know already that was somewhat alluded to as a form of double dipping, but obviously the Metro people are in communication on specific addresses and particular property owners, who are getting assistance on behalf of a tenant. But does anybody else have any, I guess, can we validate or sort of discredit this idea that people in need or people aren't in need and are gaming the system?
I will jump in and say that we at Louisville Metro Government are working extremely close with the other departments within the city. So Cassandra's shop has this fantastic report they send us every week. We then, everybody that we have assisted, and we have the list and names and addresses, obviously, of the people we've assisted, we have shared that information with them so that they can say, oh, look, your landlord was paid last week, so you don't need to apply. So we are absolutely, positively working with each other. So when we go the next step down, and can they receive assistance from the community ministries or any of the other various entities that are providing assistance? I would say that that the need is so great that sometimes we're not going to be able to provide all of the assistance they need through Cassandra's shop or my shop, or even combining it with what Claire has. So there are some people, I've personally talked to people who are $6,000 or $7,000 behind in rent. And I can only do 3 months. Claire has limited funds. So I think that's kind of a harsh word to say they're gaming the system, because I think the need is so immense. And frankly, I think we need to help people where they are and as much as we can help them.
Right. I think you're bringing up that this is a structural issue, right? Landlords and tenants depend on one another to do what they do, whether that's live there or provide safe and decent housing. And we're not going to work our way out of this pandemic because of the crush to the American economy, So thank you for that, Marilyn. Claire, did you have something to add on that particular?
Yeah, I can't help myself. So, I mean, I'm seeing folks every day, and because we are able to be in the neighborhoods that we are serving as community ministries, we also know our neighbors. We know that also the families that have never been there before. There is income verification. We are looking at their payrolls and seeing in their bank accounts, unfortunately, that it has that their salary has depleted or is gone. And so no one is going to take $150 of late fees or have to pay an eviction fee and go through this really tedious process just because they want to receive $1,000 or $2,000. It's also throughout the process, it's almost impossible. And in all of my time working with families who are living in chronic poverty, just a reminder, 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So when one thing happens, and we're all really close to that, when one thing happens, then we are, living in crisis. Then all of a sudden, all of our bills pile up, and it's a snowball effect. Right. So we really have to understand that we're in this together, that it requires generosity and patience and kindness, because this is going to be really difficult for the next few months. Mm-hmm. So yeah, also, if you received a late fee and you are under the CARES Act properties, again, there's that link in number 3 in Stop My Eviction to find out if your property is under the CARES Act. You should legally, they are not allowed to charge you a late fee. So if you are getting late fees and you are under a CARES Act, please know that.
Mm-hmm. Another good reason to bookmark www.stopmyeviction.org, which I'm assuming is going to be updated as, things change. Just a continuous resource, for those directly impacted and those who that might be facing or confronting something like this. Claire, I'm going to come back to you. Just give people a sense of the systematic nature and ongoing nature of this challenge. You recently shared a statistic with me on what it might cost to bring everybody current on their rent. And so I know there is a push for things like canceling rent. I haven't seen that, that the government is going to take any measure like that, that just wipes it out and cancels that. And for some good reason, because frankly, there are some landlords who are not federally assisted, who that would devastate them and bankrupt them to not get any rent and create a house of falling cards there. But what's the numbers that you've heard thus far on, like if somebody wonderful like Bill Gates, if he's listening, wanted to just write Louisville a check to clear everybody's rent and bring them up to up current, what would that look like?
I actually stole this number from Marilyn. She's the one who did the math on this. And so correct me if I'm wrong, Marilyn, we've received, and it sounds like a big number, but but about $30 million in rental assistance currently. However, if you take the percentage, and it is higher than when we did this math, those numbers are higher, so this number will be higher. Take the amount of delinquency rate, so we were at a 30% rental delinquency rate approximately. Taking that with the average rent, which is around that $750 mark, and that's on the lower end, and figure out, okay, so how much rent is that? We're, what was it, 77 million?
So we were at about 78 million, and Claire is correct. We have, in Louisville, we have 121,000 renter households. We estimate somewhere between 20 and 30% of them are delinquent. And the National Multifamily Housing database shows us that they are running about 30% delinquent. So when we do the math there, back in June, we were at about 78 million. It's about $21 million a month delinquent. So we're probably close to 100 million delinquent right now.
Right. And that's just a huge blow to our local economy. It's a huge destabilizer of our local housing market. And, we're not saying that we on this panel have all the solutions, but we just invite the community, to keep their attention on these issues and how it may be impacting people. If your employees are showing up to work and they don't know if they're going to have a roof over their head, that's an opportunity to be compassionate, to check in with people, to really see how they're doing. And the programs that we've laid out here typically are income restricted. That's not to say that there aren't people that make more money who are facing similar challenges in paying their rent. And they can't go, to the neighborhood place or to the Department of Housing, and probably not, maybe not community ministries, to get help. So if there are people out there, who want to understand the nature, the impact of this, to understand that it's not just affecting one simple segment of our population, but it's affecting our entire community, whether people want to share with you or not. But, between the pandemic, their direct loss, we're mourning people, we're mourning our ability to socialize with one another. But there are people who are probably not sharing just how difficult financially they might be doing right now. And so just encouraging that open communication, being compassionate, and giving people some room, some benefit of the doubt for what they either are or are not sharing, I think is going to help, really show the compassionate dynamic of our city. One question that came through the chat wants to know about the turnaround. So if somebody reaches out to Claire, this is, I know you've got your, you've already said that with your navigators, you're going to have like a 24, 48-hour turnaround. But like for Marilyn and Cassandra, on average, assuming that both programs are in fact up and running, how long on average does it take from the time a tenant or a landlord applies to actually get that money in hand? What's that looking like?
So I'll start with that, Marilyn. In a perfect scenario, Jeana, once we receive all of the documents and we're able to process payments, it takes about 10 to 15 days, 10 to 15 working days in order for the landlord to receive our check. Our program is up and running. People have already applied. There's been right at close to 100 people who've been assisted. So, we are up and ready. The appointment line, when I checked early this morning, we had appointments out, our next available appointments are next week. So, folks can get in. Once you are on the phone with the information and referral technician, that's the person that would be calling you back, and they go through all of those documents, get those in as soon as possible, because the longer you delay getting your paperwork, the longer it is for us to ultimately get the landlord your check. We do offer people a 3-day turnaround time in terms of getting their paperwork back to us. We are a client-centered organization, and that just basically means that if clients are struggling with getting documentation, we will work very close with them, even some hand-holding if that's necessary, in order to get their paperwork, to get their applications processed. And so again, once all things are ready to go and we hit approve in our system, it is taken somewhere between 10 to 15 working days for the landlord to get the payment.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to make sure this is clear because it can be complicated. There are 2 applications right now available within the neighborhood place. One is the One Louisville Fund and the other is the Eviction Prevention Program. And correct me if I'm wrong, Cassandra, but the Eviction Prevention Program right now is the one that is going to reach back out to you a little bit more sooner. The waiting list for that is much faster. Is that right?
It is, yes. And those, yes, and they have 2 different appointment systems. The numbers that we're sharing today is for the Eviction Prevention Program. But she's right. We have multiple programs. And so that's why I said earlier that if people are in whatever kind of financial situation they're in and they find themselves in need of rental assistance, Neighborhood Place is really the perfect place to start with. And we can screen and assess and see where you fit in. And then if we're not able to help, we can get you connected to the correct service provider.
I'd like to, Jeana, let me jump in here for landlords.
Yeah.
We have a goal of 15 days for us to review your application and get the check out to you. So we are working diligently to do that. We've processed, I want to say 9 of the 13 applications we've received, and those checks have been either processed by us and over at OMB to send out to you, or they are in landlords' hands at this point.
So, and so just to clarify, that's why it's so important to understand what you have, what documentation either a tenant or a landlord has to gather. Because if you show up day one and you have checked every box and have all of your paperwork, that is what these ladies are saying in terms of turning around, getting your application process will go that much faster. But if you submit an impartial application, it's going to take that much longer before they can even begin processing your request. Is that fair and accurate, ladies? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's perfect. We try to prep people on the front end as best we can to make sure that they get us exactly what it is that we're needing.
So question maybe for Marilyn in terms of the rental relief program as a whole, can you tell, or is there a proportion that's set aside for landlords versus a proportion that's set aside for tenant applications? Or is it even set up that way, or is it more first?
It is not. It is not set. It's not an even split. We have 15 million for the landlord portion, and we have 6 million for the renter portion, and the renter access portion or the landlord access portion. However, at the end of the month, we will look at that and determine if we need to shift those. So if it turns out that Cassandra's program is running out of money, we have the ability to shift our funds to Cassandra's program. Or if Cassandra's program is not using the money, they could shift it to us. So we have that ability. We will shift however we need to do. I will say that I get quite a few calls. Just poor Cassandra, I know they are swamped over there, and I get a ton of calls. I called that number and nobody answered, or I applied and I haven't heard anything back. I can tell you from my conversations that I have had, the number one reason that applications stall is incomplete application or no response. So
Absolutely.
The person calls out, the intake technician calls, they talk to the person and they say, send these documents, and that person either never sends them or they never check their email, those kinds of things. So it is critically important that tenants follow up with their email, make sure they've given the email correctly. When we're working with emails, a dot between a first and last name makes a huge difference on whether or not you get that email. So if it's Marilyn.Harris as opposed to Marilyn Harris at Gmail or whatever, Marilyn.Harris is not me. I'm not going to get that email. Marilyn Harris, I'll get the email. So that is critically important. And I can't express that enough, because that is a problem that we see quite a bit. And then back to Claire's point, there are people that don't have email, don't have that electronic ability, communication. They're not able to do that. So having that direct access with Cassandra's folks on the intake line, they've done everything they can to open it up so that people can bring the documents and drop them off, or send pictures of the documents. And there was a question about certifications and how do you prove something that's a negative, that you're not working. We have been able to do self-certifications. So under the landlord program, we just require a self-certification by the tenant that they have been affected by COVID. They have had a COVID-related loss of income. All we're requiring is a self-certification. So that's important to know.
Okay, Claire, you look like you've got something burning to add. Get in there. What do you?
I've seen two questions that ask this, and I think it's really just good to ask. It's about whether or not the person who's applied and is receiving funding, but in that 10 to 15 days can receive a letter.
A letter saying,
for the landlord, saying that they are going to receive that funding. So the landlord can expect to receive that in 10 to 15 days. I'll let Cassandra speak for Neighborhood Place, but if you are within the stopmyeviction.org program where you're connected with a coordinator who's helping you with this paperwork, and we are communicating with the Neighborhood Place or other resources, and they have communicated to us that yes, they've been approved and a check is going out, we will be able to give that letter to you so that you can bring it to court if necessary, or to your landlord. But I'm not sure if the Neighborhood Place has that capacity right now.
We certainly do. So very similar to the community ministries, we are able to provide that letter. Once we determine that you're eligible, we can write a letter, just confirming how much you're eligible for. But I will say that 100% of the time when we're making assistance, we have been in contact with that landlord. So we've set their expectation. We've told them how soon it would be before they would possibly be able to receive a check from us. But if it is necessary, and there are a lot of situations in which it is that landlords want that in writing, and we are certainly able to do that.
Okay, wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. Another sort of interesting question is, I guess, the requirement of landlords to accept payments on their tenants' behalf. For those of us with a long history in housing, for example, if you are the holder of a Section 8 voucher, there is no legal requirement for a landlord who's leasing an apartment to rent to a voucher holder, right? And that's unfortunate. And it's not illegal for them to have a policy against accepting Section 8. But in this scenario, thinking about some of the unscrupulous behavior that has been reported from certain landlords, certainly not all in any means, but is it a situation, like if a tenant comes through the program, have you seen any examples where the landlord is unwilling to accept payment on their behalf? Oh,
yes.
wow.
In fact, yes, I had that today, where the landlord was really not willing to accept a partial payment, even though, our piece matched with the client's portion. They would have had it all. It just wouldn't have come in at the same time. So there's that issue. There's some landlords that just will not, under any circumstance, accept partial payments. And then we do have one landlord in town that is just totally unwilling to complete a W-9 process, to just fill out W-9 information. So that does put a hardship on the client. So yes, we've seen that.
Yes, Claire.
And unfortunately, really the only thing we can do right now is to put pressure on the eviction court. And so, and our elected judges in town. And so if there are those of you out there who are advocates and feel like this, some of the things that would really help this process is to require landlords to participate in mediation to ensure that all sources of financial assistance have been considered before they can file for an eviction. Number 2 is to commit to consider the totality of the circumstances facing landlords and tenants, providing to order a disruptive, costly, and dangerous eviction on a household and a neighborhood. Did the renter pay? Cannot be the only question the court considers during a global pandemic and economic crisis. Yes, and number 3 is communicate with social workers. This is a big one. Communicate with social workers and lawyers to learn how their collaborative and coordinated effort, what we're talking about now, can help make the eviction court process more accessible, understood, and fair to our renters. Because right now where we stand with the eviction court, it is not where it needs to be.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know for our audience that we're covering a lot of detail, a lot of nuance. That's why, one, we want to remind you that we are recording this session. We're recording this session, that the session should be available on demand at any time on YouTube and on Facebook. You can play it, send it to other people, dig down into the details, take notes. We are obviously not so bashful about sharing this new resource that's online, www.stopmyeviction.org. And if the answer is not readily available there, there are numbers and more leads that you can get that will map you back to people who have the knowledge and the expertise, to address any range of situation. If you need to talk to somebody at legal aid, if you need somebody to help you navigate, we can't anticipate every scenario, but I'm sure just in terms of what our community is going through, there is somebody that's representative of just about every scenario that you can imagine. And so we're really hoping that you use and share the resource, stopmyeviction.org, to help people tackle whatever their unique situation may be. Also, Metropolitan Housing Coalition, we're sponsoring these conversations because these are the issues that are confronting our community right now. And we have a platform, and it is our mission to use it to advocate for people in the housing that they deserve. So I'd also like to, remind you, if you are on the internet, if you are on email, that we send out monthly newsletters. And that's going to be critical information as we navigate the next, 6 months, if not longer. Our staff does a wonderful job keeping people informed and up to date about what's going on, not just with rent, but thinking about utilities, right? LIHEAP is another program that comes out of the Department of Resilience and Community Services. And so just being able to keep up with your utilities is another dynamic that I believe Neighborhood Place can help people navigate that program as well, because they're a one-stop shop. But the MHC newsletters, the blasts that are done on the website, being tuned in and connected there is not just a matter of helping yourself, it's about you being helpful to other people. And so I will put in a shameless plug on behalf of myself, Marilyn Harris, and Robin Bray, who are all members of the board of directors of the Metropolitan Housing Coalition, that you can join for $1 or more. You decide how much you want to pay to join our coalition and to become a member. And I'm saying, I think the return on that $1 or more investment is more than you could ever quantify for being in the know, being in the loop, and becoming a community advocate. I think we're nearing our time. We're at 6:11 by my count. I think we've done a great job addressing most of the questions that have come through. If we've missed your questions, we will in fact take the time to follow up with everybody who signed on and registered for this event. Again, there will be other information coming online at the MHC website, as well as the stopmyeviction.org as information changes. We want to keep that up to date. And so if there are no objections, I would like to give the last word to our panelists. So Robin, are there any final remarks that you'd like to make on the situation or what we've discussed here today? Okay, I think we're having a technical.
Jeana, I think Robin doesn't have any volume. She can't speak. So I think,
Well,
I
why
think
don't you
she's.
kick us off, Marilyn? What's your final word?
I would just like to say that if you are a renter and you are listening to this, please, please, please reach out to your landlord. Open that dialogue, have that communication. We're all in this together. We all understand that this is a pandemic, and we're facing problems that we've never faced before. So please, if you are a tenant, don't be afraid to reach out to your landlord. And if you are a landlord, please, I beg you, please work on a payment plan with your tenants. They don't want to be in the position they're in any more than you want them in that position. And having been a property manager previously, I know it's heartbreaking when you don't collect that rent, but it's also very expensive to turn a unit and move somebody else in. So if you can work on a payment plan with that tenant and they can get caught back up with either Cassandra's help, or if you're an affordable unit with my help or Claire's help, or one of the myriad of resources we have available, please take advantage of those programs, because relocation, especially for low-income people, relocation is a very expensive proposition. To move is very expensive, and low-income people can least afford to do that, and unfortunately, they are the people that are evicted and are moving the most. And that is a huge problem, and we need to figure out a way to stop it. And the first way we can stop it during this pandemic is to open the dialogue and communication between tenants and landlords, and be willing to accept the help that's out there.
That's good insight, Marilyn. It's expensive and stressful to move in a pandemic, right? So, Cassandra, what would you like to leave us with?
I just want to say that if you find yourself in this situation and you're getting late notices and lots of threats to be evicted, don't move. Do not move out of your unit until your landlord has gone through all of the legal processes to get you out. In the meantime, seek help. Again, Neighborhood Place, there's 7 locations throughout Jefferson County. You're free to go to any one of them. We do have a lot of money to be able to help you, and we want to help you. We are looking at ways to say yes within the context of our eligibility requirements, and we are very willing to help you get documentation that may be difficult for you to obtain. We will help you work through that process. A lot of times, we do find success with that when a client has struggled and not been able to get the information that they need. But don't move out, again, until you've gone through all of the legal processes, and seek help. Again, we're there when the person calls you on the phone to go over all of the requirements for the program. Please make sure you have pen and paper ready and write that down so that you can make sure you get the correct documentation that we need so your case can get through the process as quick as possible. But we are here and we stand ready to help.
Thank you, Cassandra.
You're welcome.
Robin won't be able to share sentiments, but we definitely want to share our appreciation for her leadership on the board and everything that she does in community. And so we'll pitch the last word to Claire Wallace.
Oh gosh. Well, actually, Cassandra and Marilyn did a great job of leaving us with great last words. This is really difficult. Again, it is really very stressful to not know if you can make rental payments. And also, there's a lot of people who are in your shoes right now if that is the reality that you face. Unfortunately, we are building a lot of this too right now because of the pandemic. We are doing things differently. We're building new systems. So, we have to cut each other a little slack, but then also we are absolutely here for you. So stopmyeviction.org, please come back to that website, and in just a couple of days, we'll have that form up and we'll work with you as much as we can.
Thank you so much. Let's give a virtual round of applause to all of our panelists here today. Thank you to Marva. I know we talk really fast and really about a lot of details, so thank you for keeping up with us. Thank you to Jess and Kathy for managing our chat. And again, stay tuned, stay connected with MHC and stopmyeviction.org. And with that, we wish you a great, great evening. Thanks so much.